Hello dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a warm, emotional story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. The Storm of Fate. The roar of the airplane engines mingled with the howling wind outside the window, but it couldn't drown out the announcement blaring through the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected Category 10 storm, we are forced to make an emergency landing at the nearest local airport. Please remain calm and follow instructions. Leonard Carter, 35 years old, sat in the frontmost seat, his hand gripping the whiskey glass on his tray, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. He didn't bother looking up from the iPad displaying the map of his latest real estate project, a billion-dollar resort in a small coastal city. "Emergency landing?" he muttered, his voice low and cold as ice. "I don't have time for this nonsense." Leonard was the CEO of Carter Enterprises, a colossal real estate empire stretching from London to New York. To him, time was money, and money was power. The only two things he trusted since his wife and son were taken from him 5 years ago in a ruthless power struggle. His enemies had hired assassins to target his family as a message. And since then, Leonard's heart had turned to stone. He no longer laughed, no longer cried, only wielded a cold, razor-sharp demeanor to sever any relationship that didn't serve his interests. This storm, to him, was just a minor annoyance, something he'd handle like everything else, swiftly and without emotion. But in the economy cabin, a few rows behind him, Eleanor Brooks didn't see it that way. She clutched her worn backpack tightly, her hands trembling as the plane shook violently. At 29, Eleanor was a resilient single mother, raising her 6-year-old son Ethan, alone with 3 grueling jobs, serving coffee in the mornings, delivering packages in the afternoons, and cleaning offices at night. Despite her poverty, she always wore a smile, a radiant one, like rare sunlight breaking through London's rainy days. To Elena, life was a series of challenges, but she believed that with effort, good things would come. "As long as Ethan's okay," she told herself, her eyes fixed on the window where the pitch-black sky was torn apart by lightning. This flight wasn't her idea. A local delivery company had hired her for a temporary gig in this small city, promising double pay if she finished by the weekend. Elena had agreed, leaving Ethan with their kind elderly neighbor, Mrs. Mary. But now, as the plane lurched like it might plummet, she wanted to scream, "I shouldn't have taken this damn job." Instead, she stayed silent, biting her lip, praying for Ethan and herself. The plane touched down with a piercing screech of tires grinding against the runway, jolting so hard that Leonard's whiskey splashed across his Armani suit. He cursed under his breath, wiping his hand with a napkin, his eyes blazing as he glanced out the window. The local airport was pitifully small, just one dilapidated terminal, no control tower, and now submerged in a white curtain of rain. The loudspeaker crackled again. "Due to the storm, all flights are canceled until further notice. Passengers, please seek safe shelter." Leonard stood, grabbed his suitcase, and disembarked with the air of someone heading to a board meeting, heedless of the rain pelting his face. He called his private driver, but the signal flickered, and when it connected, the voice on the other end reported, "The roads are flooded, sir. I can't get through." He growled, "Useless!" then turned to an airport worker. "Where's the nearest hotel?" The employee, trembling under his icy stare, pointed, "There's just one inn 2 blocks away, but I don't know if they have rooms." At the same moment, Elena stepped off the plane, her thin jacket soaked through, her backpack slung unevenly over one shoulder. She had no driver, no car, just a pair of torn sneakers and a will to survive to get back to Ethan. Hearing the worker mention the inn, she hurried in the direction he pointed, unaware that Leonard was walking the same way, a few steps ahead. The storm roared like a beast, fierce winds toppling trees along the road, rainwater surging over the sidewalks like a river. Leonard strode quickly, not bothering to shield himself, his expensive suit now bedraggled. Though he didn't care, he just wanted out of this miserable place. Elena ran behind, clutching her backpack like a lifeline, her hair plastered to her face. They reached the inn at the same time, a small, weathered building with a flickering neon sign reading Rest Haven. It was old, its walls stained, but clean, with the faint smell of damp wood wafting from the front door. Leonard pushed the door open, his voice icy. Give me a room now. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with a messy bun, sized him up from head to toe, then glanced at Elena, who stepped in behind him. Only one room left, she said, her voice raspy. Double bed, small sofa. You two can share it. Nobody's going anywhere in this storm. Leonard turned, locking eyes with Elena for the first time. A petite woman, her soaked jacket clinging to her brown eyes bright despite her weary face. He frowned. I'm not sharing with her. Elena, panting and wiping rain from her face, shot back. I don't want to be here with you either, but the storm doesn't care who you are or what I am. Her bluntness made him pause, but he only huffed coldly, turning to the innkeeper. Find another way. The woman shrugged. There's no other way. Power's spotty, streets are flooded, nobody's getting out. Take it or sleep on the street. A deafening thunderclap rattled the windows, as if underscoring her words. Leonard gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing, but he had no choice. He tossed his credit card onto the counter. Fine, but I'm taking the bed. Elena frowned, about to protest, but thinking of Ethan at home, she sighed. Whatever. I just need a dry spot. They entered the last room, a cramped space with a double bed covered in a frayed blanket, a small faded sofa, and a rickety wooden table. The power flickered, the ceiling light blinking like it might die any second. Leonard dropped his suitcase on the floor and sank onto the sofa, his gaze sweeping the room with disdain. I'm not staying in this dump with you. Elena, setting her backpack in a corner, replied without hesitation. Dump or not, it beats standing out there in the storm. And just because you're a CEO doesn't mean I'm scared of you. I'm a single mom. Leonard turned to her, truly noticing her for the first time. Her voice didn't waver, didn't weaken. It carried a resolve he rarely saw in people around him, who usually bowed to his authority. He huffed coldly. You talk too much. But when a gust of wind slammed the window, nearly shattering the glass, he fell silent, forced to accept the reality. Tonight, he was stuck with this strange woman. Elena sat on the floor, pulling out her phone to call Mrs. Mary, her voice anxious. Is Ethan okay, Mrs. Mary? I can't get back tonight. The signal crackled, Mrs. Mary's voice breaking up. Fine. Don't worry. Storm's bad. Leonard glanced at her, catching the name Ethan faintly, but didn't ask. He opened his suitcase, took out his laptop, though he knew the battery was dying and there was no signal. They sat in silence, the sound of rain pounding the windows and wind howling like it wanted to swallow everything. The small room sank into a tense, reluctant atmosphere, tinged with absurdity. Leonard, in his rumpled suit, tried to maintain his CEO authority, while Elena, drenched and exhausted, exuded the resilience of a mother. Neither knew that, in this fateful storm, destiny had bound two seemingly distant strangers into a night that would change everything. Chapter 2. The Night of Fate, when darkness closes in. The small room in the Rest Haven Inn sank into a heavy silence, broken only by the rain pounding against the windows and the wind howling like a growling beast outside. The flickering power that had greeted Leonard Carter and Elena Brooks when they entered had now completely failed, leaving a thick darkness to envelop the cramped space. The lone oil lamp the innkeeper had given them glowed faintly on the old wooden table, its tiny flame teetering as if it might extinguish at any moment. Leonard sat on the narrow sofa, his long legs folded uncomfortably, trying to maintain the commanding air of a CEO despite his now wrinkled and damp Armani suit. Arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes stared into the void, as if that piercing gaze could force the storm to stop. Elena, in contrast, couldn't sit still. She knelt on the cold wooden floor, her worn backpack beside her, pressing her phone to her ear, struggling to catch the faint signal amid the storm. Mrs. Mary, can you hear me? Her voice trembled with worry, her brown eyes wide as she stared at the blinking screen. The connection crackled, the neighbor's voice breaking through in fragments. Elena, Ethan, fine, don't worry. A deafening thunderclap jolted her, and the phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor with a sharp thud. Elena quickly snatched it up, muttering, as long as he's okay. God, please don't let this storm drag on. Leonard glanced at her, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You're too loud," he said, his voice low and cold, devoid of any sympathy. Elena turned to him, wet hair plastered to her face, but her gaze held no weakness. "I'm worried about my son. Do you have a problem with that?" Leonard smirked, about to retort, but the violent rattling of the window from a gust of wind silenced him. He turned away, telling himself there was no point wasting words on a woman like her, someone who, in his world, he'd never even glance at. But the silence didn't last. Elena stood, stepping across the room to grab the cup of water the innkeeper had left on the table. In the dim, shadowy light, she didn't notice the sofa leg jutting out. A clack sounded as her toe struck it, and the cup tilted, spilling cold water straight onto Leonard's polished leather shoes. He sprang up as if electrified, growling, "Do you know how much these shoes cost? They're bespoke from Italy." His voice brimmed with outrage, his eyes blazing as if she'd committed an unforgivable crime. Elena, unfazed, shrugged calmly. "No, I don't. But water's free, so don't worry about it." She bent to pick up the cup, her tone light but tinged with a hint of sarcasm. Leonard was speechless, struck dumb for the first time in his life by someone he deemed beneath him. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came, and he sat back down, wiping his shoes with his hand, his face a mix of anger and helplessness. Elena turned away, covering her mouth to hide a smile, a small, humorous victory in this miserable situation. The storm outside raged on, the rain hammering the roof like a war drum, and the oil lamp's flame grew weaker, dancing as if on the verge of dying. Leonard checked his watch. The battery was dead, and the laptop he'd brought was now just a useless hunk of metal. He sighed, leaning back on the sofa, trying to find a way to pass the time in this wretched place. Elena sat back on the floor, hugging her knees, her gaze distant. The stifling closeness of the small room forced them to confront each other, though neither wanted to. "You have a son," Leonard said suddenly, his voice flat as if asking about the weather, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. Elena looked up, slightly surprised. "Yeah, Ethan. 6 years old. He's everything to me." She smiled, a gentle smile that lit up her tired face. Leonard didn't reply, just nodded slightly, but in his mind the name Ethan stirred a memory he'd buried deep, his own son Michael, who'd been that age before he was taken forever. Elena didn't notice his silence, continuing as if the darkness compelled her to speak. "He's a handful. Just yesterday, he grabbed some crayons and drew all over Mrs. Mary's walls, and I had to apologize for an hour. But Ethan's why I keep going every day." She paused, her voice softening. "One time I cried quietly because I couldn't afford milk. I lied and said the store was out, but he just smiled and said, 'It's okay, Mom. I like water better.'" A tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly, smiling. "Silly, right?" Leonard stayed silent, his eyes softening, losing their usual icy edge. He wasn't used to this kind of honesty. The people around him always wore masks, saying what he wanted to hear to curry favor. But Elena was different, sharing her story with a simplicity and strength he couldn't ignore. He wanted to say something, but his throat felt dry, so he just sat there, listening. The storm outside roared louder, a thunderclap splitting the sky like a tear, making the room tremble slightly. Elena flinched, clutching her shoulders, while Leonard instinctively gripped the armrest. In that moment, the pressure of the darkness and the storm's fury seemed to strip away their defenses. Leonard blurted out, his voice hoarse, "I had a son once, but I couldn't protect him." He stopped, his blue eyes darkening, as if he'd just unlocked a door he'd kept bolted shut for years. Elena turned to him, her gaze gentle but not probing. I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. Leonard shook his head. "Don't. It's not your fault." He didn't elaborate, but the silence that followed was no longer oppressive. Elena sensed the pain he hid behind his cold exterior, a pain she understood, though in her own way. She'd lost the man she loved, Ethan's father, in a car accident, but she'd chosen to keep living for her son. Leonard, she guessed, had chosen to freeze himself instead. The oil lamp finally went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Elena panicked. "Oh no, where's the light?" She fumbled on the table, searching for the matchbox the innkeeper had left, while Leonard sat still, unresponsive. Her hand brushed against his, a light touch, her cold, wet fingers grazing his warm skin. Both flinched, Elena pulling back as if shocked. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Leonard didn't answer, but in the dark he felt his heartbeat quicken, not from anger or power, but from something he'd forgotten long ago. He stayed silent, peering into the blackness where Elena sat, now just a faint silhouette. That touch cracked the ice around his heart, if only slightly. For the first time in years, Leonard felt his heart stir. Not for money, not for power, but for the simple woman sitting across from him who'd just spilled water on his shoes and spoken of her mischievous son with a warm smile. He didn't know why, but in this fateful night, amid the storm's roar, he no longer wanted to push her away. Elena found the matches, striking one, the weak light illuminating her face, exhausted yet resolute. She looked at Leonard, smiling. "At least we're still alive tonight, right?" He didn't reply, just nodded faintly. But inside, a quiet question echoed. Could I really live again? Chapter 3. A dramatic reunion. The sun rose after the storm, pale golden light filtering through dissipating clouds, illuminating the weathered Rest Haven Inn. Leonard Carter stood at the door, suitcase in hand, his Armani suit now crumpled and tinged with the damp wood scent of the cramped room where he'd spent an unforgettable night. He glanced at his watch, 6 a.m., and didn't look back as he stepped outside, his demeanor as cold as if neither the storm nor a strange woman had ever disrupted him. To him, last night was just a fleeting incident, a minor ripple in the tightly controlled life of a powerful CEO. He called his driver, climbed into the waiting glossy black Bentley, and left the small town without a single word of goodbye. Elena Brooks, on the other hand, wasn't in such a rush. She stood in the room, now brighter with sunlight, checking her worn backpack before leaving. Last night had been a mess. Power outages, spilling water on that arrogant man's shoes, and unexpected stories spilling from her lips in the dark. But as she stepped outside, breathing the fresh post-storm air, her thoughts turned only to Ethan. She caught the last bus home, relief washing over her when she confirmed her little boy was safe with Mrs. Mary. Her grueling life resumed, serving coffee, delivering packages, cleaning offices, and the image of Leonard, with his expensive shoes and icy stare, quickly faded from her mind. They parted without a formal farewell, like two lines that had crossed by chance and would diverge forever. But fate, as it often does, had a knack for playing tricks. A month later, Leonard sat in the luxurious office of Carter Enterprises in London, his sharp blue eyes scanning financial reports on the screen. His latest project, a low-cost housing development in the same small coastal town where he'd been stranded, was progressing rapidly. He decided to inspect it personally, not because he distrusted his team, but because he wanted everything flawless before presenting it to the shareholders. He boarded his private jet and landed at the local airport, now temporarily patched up after the disaster. At the same time in that small town, Elena Brooks stepped into the makeshift office of the construction company behind the affordable housing project. She'd just taken a part-time job as an administrative assistant, typing reports, organizing files, to earn extra money for rent. Her white shirt was wrinkled from a long day running between the coffee shop and here, but she still managed to smile for her coworkers, trying to stay upbeat. She had no idea the company was owned by Carter Enterprises, let alone that fate was about to deal her a wild card. The meeting took place in a simple prefab room, furnished with a long wooden table and a few old plastic chairs. Leonard strode in, his dark gray suit hugging his frame, exuding a cold, commanding presence. He sat at the head of the table, his deep voice ringing out as he demanded progress updates. The local staff bowed their heads, stammering through their reports, none daring to meet his razor-sharp blue eyes. Then the door opened, and Elena walked in, a stack of papers in hand, her brown hair tied back in a messy bun after a hectic day. She didn't notice the man at the head of the table, focusing only on setting the documents down and saying, "Here's this week's expense report. Take it if you need it." Leonard looked up and time seemed to freeze. He was stunned, his eyes widening for a split second before reverting to their cold mask. Elena Brooks, the woman who'd spilled water on his shoes, who'd spoken of her son in the dark, stood before him in a crumpled shirt and scuffed sneakers. Elena finally glanced at him and gave a calm smirk. "Guess I can't escape you, huh?" Her voice was light but laced with sarcasm, silencing the room as a few employees exchanged puzzled looks, unsure what was happening. Leonard cleared his throat, trying to maintain his authority. "What are you doing here?" Elena shrugged, resting a hand on her hip. "Working, obviously." "What about you? Don't tell me you're here to collect for those shoes." A soft chuckle escaped from a corner of the room, quickly stifled by Leonard's fiery glare. He gritted his teeth. "This is my project. I'm the investor." Elena blinked, then laughed. "Well, good for you. But don't expect me to bow just because you're the big shot." She turned away, resuming her task of sorting papers, leaving Leonard with a mix of irritation and surprise. The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere, but the real drama began when the sound of small footsteps echoed from the doorway. "Mom!" Ethan, Elena's 6-year-old son, burst into the room, his backpack slung crookedly over one shoulder, his face flushed from running home from school. He wore a threadbare jacket, his brown eyes, identical to his mother's, sparkling, and he immediately zeroed in on Leonard. "Cool, Uncle!" Ethan shouted, pointing at him. "Do you have a superhero car?" Leonard, who'd avoided children since his own loss, stiffened, unsure how to respond. Elena quickly grabbed Ethan. "Don't bother him." "Sorry, he got out of school early today." But Ethan wriggled free, darting closer to Leonard. "Are you like a superhero? Can you fight monsters?" Leonard stared at the boy, a rare flicker of confusion crossing his blue eyes. He opened his mouth to snap, but Ethan's innocent grin, one tooth missing, cheeks smudged with dirt, made him smile faintly instead. It was a small smile, but it stunned Elena, who froze, watching him as if she couldn't believe her eyes. "The kid, he's lively," Leonard said, his voice dry, trying to keep his distance. Ethan giggled. "I like you. You're cooler than my teacher." Leonard didn't reply, turning his face away, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward again. Elena pulled Ethan outside, whispering, "Don't pester him. He's a big shot." But when she glanced back, Leonard's eyes were still on them, as if he'd been drawn into a world he didn't want to acknowledge. In the days that followed, Leonard visited the project site more often than necessary, though he told himself it was just for work. But every time he showed up, Ethan was there, running after his mom post-school, clinging to Leonard with endless questions. "Do you have a superhero car? Which superhero do you like? Are you good at fighting?" Leonard tried to stay aloof, answering curtly, "I don't have time to play with kids." But the boy wasn't deterred, even tugging his hand. "Play with me just once," Elena fretted, apologizing repeatedly. "I'll make him stop bothering you." But Leonard just shook his head. "It's fine." Leonard's inner conflict grew sharper. He hated kids, or rather he feared them. Every glance at Ethan brought back memories of Michael, his own son, from the happy days now gone. But the boy's innocence, paired with Elena's quiet strength as she worked in her weary state, began pulling him into an unfamiliar feeling. One time, Ethan dropped Leonard's pen while trying to doodle on his hand. He almost snapped, but the boy grinned. "You're cooler when you smile." Leonard stayed quiet, picked up the pen, and for the first time, didn't push him away. Elena watched from a distance, her heart torn. She didn't want Ethan troubling this big shot, but she couldn't deny Leonard seemed different around her son. One afternoon, as Ethan ran up to show Leonard a superhero drawing from school, Leonard unexpectedly crouched down, taking the paper. "Not bad, but my superhero's stronger." Ethan cheered. "Really? Tell me." Elena stood there, witnessing the odd scene, a cold CEO sitting with her son in a dusty office, and she didn't know why her heart raced. Leonard stood, brushing dust off his suit, trying to reclaim his icy demeanor. "Don't bother me again." But as he walked away, his gaze lingered on Elena, and she saw a struggle in his eyes, between the walls he'd built and something starting to crack. He didn't want to admit it, but Ethan's innocence and Elena's silent resilience were drawing him into a world he'd sworn never to enter again. Chapter 4. A Silent Transformation. Leonard Carter stood in the makeshift office of the Affordable Housing Project, his sharp blue eyes scanning the stack of reports on the desk. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since his first reunion with Elena Brooks and her son Ethan, and he'd been coming to this small town more often than necessary, a fact he didn't want to admit the reason for, even to himself. He told himself it was for work, that this project mattered to Carter Enterprises' reputation, but deep down, he knew something else was drawing him back. Ethan's innocent laughter, Elena's resilient gaze as she worked in her crumpled shirt, these things crept into his mind like tiny cracks in the ice wall he'd built around himself for the past 5 years. That day, Leonard arrived early, before Elena and Ethan showed up. He was discussing details with the project manager when he caught a murmur from the group of employees near the door. A middle-aged man with slick-back, greasy hair sauntered by, coffee cup in hand, tossing a taunting remark at Elena as she walked in. "Hey, Brooks, free tonight? I'll treat you to dinner, but don't bring the little brat along, okay?" He grinned sleazily, his eyes glued to her as if trying to devour her. Elena stopped, clutching a stack of files, her voice icy. "Thanks, but I'm not free. And don't call my son a brat." Leonard turned, his gaze darkening as he heard the man's words. The guy didn't notice, continuing to snicker. "Come on, don't play hard to get. A single mom like you should know how to seize an opportunity." Before Elena could reply, Leonard stepped forward, his voice cutting like a blade. "Get out of here." The man spun around, about to argue, but Leonard's stare, frigid and authoritative, left him speechless. I was just kidding, Mr. Carter," he stammered, but Leonard cut him off. "Joke again, and you'll be out of a job. Leave." The man paled, scurrying away, leaving Elena standing there, surprised and puzzled. She looked at Leonard, frowning. "I could have handled it myself." "You didn't need to do that." Leonard turned away, his tone curt. "I don't like useless people slowing things down." He walked outside, not letting her see the faint upward twitch of his lips. A silent, discreet act, but the first time he'd stepped into her life without a work-related excuse. In the days that followed, Leonard started paying more attention. He noticed Elena often worked late, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, and once overheard her on the phone with her landlady. "I'll pay the rent next week, I swear. Please don't evict us." Her voice trembled, yet she tried to hold on to her strength. Leonard said nothing, but the next day he quietly contacted the landlady through an assistant, paying 3 months' rent in advance without Elena's knowledge. When she found out via a thank you letter from the landlady, she stormed into the temporary office, her stack of papers spilling everywhere in her fury. "What did you do?" she shouted, her eyes blazing. Leonard, mid-signature on a contract, looked up calmly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elena slammed the letter onto the desk. "Don't play dumb. You paid my rent? I don't live off your pity." Leonard set his pen down, meeting her gaze. "I'm not pitying you. I just don't want my staff distracted by petty issues." Elena clenched her teeth. "I'm not your direct employee, and I don't need your help. I can manage on my own." She turned to leave, but Leonard called after her. "You're stubborn as hell." Elena didn't reply, storming out, her heart torn between gratitude and confusion over his strange concern. But his most significant silent act came on a cold, rainy night. Elena was at home, in a rundown little apartment on the edge of town, when Ethan suddenly spiked a high fever. The boy lay in bed, his face flushed, breathing labored. Elena panicked, rummaging for medicine but finding only a few expired paracetamol tablets. She called for a taxi, but no one would brave the downpour. "Ethan, wait for Mommy, I'll figure something out," she whispered, tears streaming down as she held him close. Her phone buzzed, a strange number, and when she answered, Leonard's voice came through. "Where are you?" Elena froze. "You? Why are you calling me?" Leonard didn't explain, repeating, "Where are you?" His tone was urgent, a stark contrast to his usual coldness. Stammering, Elena gave her address, and within 15 minutes the headlights of a sleek black Bentley pierced the rain, pulling up outside. Leonard stepped out, his long coat drenched, not bothering with an umbrella. He pounded on the door, and when Elena opened it, he said nothing, just scooped Ethan up. "Get in the car." Elena didn't have time to protest, rushing after him into the vehicle. Leonard drove like a man possessed to the local hospital, rain splattering the windshield, his eyes locked ahead with absolute focus. When they arrived, he carried Ethan into the ER, barking at the nurses. "Do something!" Elena stood nearby, hands shaking, watching him with a mix of gratitude and bewilderment. The doctor examined Ethan, gave him medicine and an IV, assuring them he'd be fine after a night of observation. Leonard didn't leave. He sat on a hard plastic chair in the hospital room, his leather shoes now soaked, his gaze fixed on Ethan as the boy slept. Elena sat by her son, holding his hand, but she couldn't help stealing glances at Leonard. Late into the night, Ethan woke, his voice faint. "Mom, I'm thirsty." Leonard stood, clumsily grabbing a cup of water from the table, spilling half of it before handing it over. Ethan giggled weakly. "Cool uncle's pretty bad at this." Leonard frowned. "I'm not used to this stuff." But when Ethan asked for a story, he sat down, awkwardly beginning. "Once upon a time, there was a superhero, who fought monsters with a fire sword." Ethan laughed. "You're better than Mom." Elena watched, unable to suppress a smile. Leonard stayed up all night, sitting by Ethan's bedside, telling superhero tales until the boy drifted off again. At dawn, he stood to leave, but Elena called out, "Thank you." Leonard turned, his voice gruff. "Don't thank me. I didn't want the kids slowing down your work." But his eyes betrayed something else, a care he wasn't ready to admit. From that night, emotions erupted within Leonard. He no longer felt alone when near Elena and Ethan. Their warmth, though simple, was like a small flame melting the ice in his heart. One afternoon, he unexpectedly showed up at the soccer field near Elena's home, where Ethan was playing with some kids. The boy shouted, "Cool uncle! Teach me to kick the ball." Leonard meant to refuse, but Ethan's expectant look made him sigh. "Fine, just once." He fumbled with the ball, trying to show Ethan how to kick, but they both tumbled onto the grass after a botched shot. Elena, standing nearby, burst out laughing. "You're worse than my kid." Leonard brushed dirt off his suit, smirking. "I'm better at making money than kicking balls." Ethan clutched his stomach, giggling. "You're so funny when you fall." Leonard looked at the boy, then at Elena, and for the first time in years, he laughed genuinely, a warm, unguarded laugh. But the turning point came on a quiet night soon after. Leonard sat in his car, peering through the window at Elena's little apartment, where a golden light spilled from the window. He remembered Ethan's laughter, Elena's resilience when she rejected his rent money, and how she'd held her son in the rain. For the first time, he asked himself, could I be part of this life? He wasn't ready to admit the growing feelings, but the warmth of this mother and son was seeping through the cracks in the ice he'd built, making it impossible to return to the cold loneliness of before. Leonard started the car, driving off into the dark, but inside him, a small fire had ignited, one he couldn't extinguish, no matter how hard he tried. Chapter 5. Facing the Past. Leonard Carter sat in his sleek black Bentley, parked outside Elena Brooks' small apartment under the dim glow of a street lamp. 3 weeks had passed since the night he stayed awake by Ethan's hospital bed, since the afternoon he tumbled onto the soccer field with the boy and heard Elena's hearty laughter. Those moments, though simple, had slipped into his mind like a warm breeze, stirring the icy wall he'd built around himself for the past 5 years. But tonight, as he peered through the car window and saw Elena's silhouette step onto the balcony, cradling Ethan in her arms, a different feeling surged within him: fear. He realized he loved her. It wasn't a fleeting attraction or initial curiosity, but a real, profound love that made his heart pound whenever she was near. He loved the resilience in her eyes, the way she rejected his pity with unshakable pride, and even Ethan's mischievous grin when the boy called him cool uncle. But that very realization terrified him. Memories of his family, his wife and son, Michael, taken in a ruthless conspiracy 5 years ago, flooded back with vivid clarity. He remembered Michael's laughter, his wife's embrace, and then the deafening explosion of the car in the dark night, a sound that had torn his life apart. If he lost someone he loved again, he wouldn't survive it. He questioned himself, hands gripping the steering wheel. Am I good enough for them, or will I fail again, like I did then? Leonard wasn't a man accustomed to fear. He'd faced the most dangerous foes in the business world, crushing them with his cold resolve without blinking. But now he trembled, a nameless, shapeless dread that choked him every time he thought of stepping into Elena and Ethan's lives. He started the car, speeding off into the darkness, trying to bury that feeling, but it kept rising, a relentless ghost that wouldn't let go. Inside her small apartment, Elena was restless too. She sat on a worn armchair, watching Ethan play with a toy car Leonard had brought the week before. An unexpected gift the boy cherished so much he took it to bed every night. She smiled seeing him happy, but the smile quickly faded, replaced by a simmering doubt. Leonard had changed. He wasn't the arrogant CEO she'd met during the storm anymore. He'd shielded her from a crude co-worker, paid her rent despite her refusal, and stayed up all night when Ethan was sick. But she was afraid he saw her only as a temporary balm for what he'd lost. Afraid Ethan, who so easily called him cool uncle, would be hurt if Leonard walked away one day. She'd loved before, trusted a man, Ethan's father, only to lose him in a car accident when she was 7 months pregnant. She'd learned not to lean on anyone, not to hope too much, because every shattered hope took a piece of her with it. Who was Leonard to her? A wealthy, powerful man from a world she didn't belong to. Would he truly stay, or was he just a breeze passing through her and Ethan's lives? She hugged Ethan as he yawned, whispering, "Mommy won't let you get hurt." But her heart felt hollow, unsure she could keep that promise. The tension peaked one drizzly evening when Leonard appeared unannounced at Elena's door. He wore a long black coat, his hair wet from not using an umbrella. His blue eyes conflicted as she opened the door. "I need to talk," he said, his voice low but trembling slightly, a rarity for him. Elena nodded, letting him in, though unease gripped her. Ethan was asleep, the small apartment quiet except for the steady patter of rain outside. Leonard stood in the middle of the living room, not sitting, hands in his coat pockets as if trying to steady himself. He looked at her, his gaze deep. "I love you, Elena." The confession came abruptly, unadorned, but heavy like a stone dropping between them. Elena froze, her brown eyes widening, her heart hammering as if it might burst. Before she could respond, Leonard pressed on, his voice hoarse. "But I can't take the risk. I can't let you and Ethan into my life, only to lose you like before." Elena blinked, her shock swiftly turning to anger. "What are you saying?" she demanded, her voice rising, hands clutching the chair's armrest. Leonard looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I lost everything once. My wife, my son, because I wasn't strong enough to protect them. If I let myself love you, if I let Ethan call me uncle forever, and then one day I fail again, I won't survive it." He paused, his breathing labored. "I don't want to hurt you and the kid." Elena stepped forward, standing in front of him, her eyes blazing. "Don't decide for me and Ethan. Who do you think you are, choosing our lives for us? You're scared of losing us, but have you thought about how I feel, how Ethan feels?" Her voice shook with fury and pain. "You show up, make my son smile, make me believe you're different, and now you say you can't risk it? You're so selfish, Leonard." Leonard spun back, his eyes flashing. "Selfish? I'm protecting you. I don't want you stuck with a man like me, someone who only knows money, who let his family die." His voice broke, nearly a shout, the first time he'd let his emotions spill out in front of her. Elena didn't back down. "You're not protecting me. You're running away. If you're scared, fine, be scared, but don't blame your past to reject us." The argument erupted like the storm that had once trapped them in the inn. Leonard slammed his fist against the wall, a loud thud rattling the room. "You don't get it. I can't lose anyone else." Elena shouted back, "Then go! If you don't dare stay, don't hurt Ethan by giving him hope." She pointed at the door, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her gaze unwavering. Leonard stared at her, breathing heavily, then turned and walked out without another word. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Elena standing there, hands covering her face, sobbing silently. He stepped into the rain, coat drenched, got into his car and drove off, determined to sever everything to shield them both from pain, or rather, to shield himself. The ache set in immediately after. Leonard returned to his cold life in London, sitting in his luxurious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glowing city. He resumed meetings, signed contracts, negotiated with partners, tasks he'd performed like a machine for 5 years. But now sleep eluded him. Every night, Ethan's laughter echoed in his mind, that gap-toothed grin and innocent plea. "Tell me a superhero story." He recalled Elena's steadfast look when she refused his rent money, her voice shouting in their fight, "You're so selfish." He gripped his whiskey glass, staring into nothingness, wondering why his heart hurt so much when he'd chosen to leave. Elena, back in the small town, tried to stay strong for Ethan. She kept working, smiling as he talked about school, but her heart was hollow. Ethan stopped mentioning cool uncle every day, but she saw him quietly clutching the toy car Leonard had given him, his eyes tinged with sadness. Once when she asked, "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, but his voice was tiny. "I want Uncle to tell me superhero stories again." Elena pulled him into her arms, tears falling silently, blaming herself for letting him hope in someone who couldn't stay. They lived with their separate pains, miles apart yet bound by memories they couldn't erase. Leonard stared at the only photo he kept of Michael, a 6-year-old beaming brightly, and for the first time in years he cried. He didn't know that, far away, Elena was also crying as she watched Ethan sleep, wondering if she'd been wrong to push him away. But they couldn't turn back, not yet, for the past remained a wall, and neither had the courage to break it down. Chapter 6. The Moment of Awakening. Leonard Carter stood in the luxurious boardroom of Carter Enterprises in London, the crystal chandelier's light glinting off the dark gray suit he wore. But his face was shadowed, like the sky before a storm. 2 weeks had passed since he'd left Elena Brooks and Ethan in the rain, and he'd thrown himself into work like a machine, signing contracts, negotiating deals, expanding projects, as if money and power could fill the void in his heart. But now as he gazed out the large window at London's dazzling lights, he felt only emptiness. He was wealthy, powerful, yet his life was hollow. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ethan's smile, gap-toothed, eyes bright, and the boy's cheerful cry, "Cool uncle." He remembered Elena's resilience, the way she stood tall, rejecting his pity, and her ringing laughter when he'd fallen flat on the soccer field. Money couldn't fill his heart. It never had, and now he understood that only they were the precious things he truly needed. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen on the table, intending to sign a new contract, but his hand trembled and he threw it down, rising to step out onto the balcony. Cold wind whipped through, but it wasn't as chilling as the loneliness gnawing at him. Hundreds of miles away, in a small coastal town, Elena Brooks sat in her dilapidated apartment, the faint yellow glow of a lamp illuminating her face, worn but still clinging to a facade of strength. She'd worked all day, from the coffee shop to the project office, and now she was mending Ethan's torn jacket. The boy sat beside her, playing with the toy car Leonard had given him, but his eyes were sad, no longer sparkling as they once did. 2 weeks since Leonard's departure, Elena tried to stay strong, smiling for Ethan, but each night when he slept, she sat alone and cried silently. Ethan had stopped asking about cool uncle every day, but his longing showed in every gesture. One evening, as Elena folded clothes, Ethan spoke up, his voice tiny. "Where's Uncle Leonard, Mom? Doesn't he like me anymore?" Elena's hands froze, the shirt slipping to the floor, her heart squeezed tight. She turned, kneeling to hug him. "It's not like that, honey. Uncle, he's just busy." But tears spilled out beyond her control. Ethan hugged her back, whispering, "I want him to tell me superhero stories." Elena cried quietly, her heart aching, because she couldn't answer her son's question, or her own. The breaking point came on a day of pale sunshine, when Elena and Ethan faced their harshest challenge yet. The landlady, fed up with unpaid rent, pounded on the door. "Miss Brooks, I've given you too much time. Pay up by the end of the week, or I'm evicting you." Elena pleaded, "I'll pay, I swear. Just a few more days." But the woman shook her head. No more chances. Elena stood there, hands trembling, watching Ethan play outside, her heart shattering. She had no options, her jobs weren't enough, and she had no one to turn to for help. That afternoon, Ethan rode his bike around the neighborhood, trying to cheer his mom by drawing a superhero picture for her. But engrossed in his task, he didn't see a small delivery truck rolling by. Elena screamed from afar, "Ethan!" as he fell off the bike, his head striking the ground. She ran to him, cradling him in her arms, blood from his forehead staining her hands red. "Call an ambulance!" she yelled to neighbors, tears streaming uncontrollably. The ambulance arrived, rushing Ethan to the local hospital, where Elena sat by his bed, holding his hand, her spirit breaking as the doctor said he had a mild concussion but needed overnight observation. Ethan woke the next morning, his brown eyes hazy as he looked at her. "Mom, it hurts." Elena stroked his hair, whispering, "I'm here. You'll be okay." But his next words cut like a knife. "Where's Uncle Leonard?" "I want him." Elena choked, unable to answer, just holding him tighter. She grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over Leonard's number, but she didn't dare call. He'd left, and she wouldn't beg. Yet fate had its own plan. In London, Leonard had just wrapped up a meeting, sitting in his office with a heavy heart. He picked up his phone, scrolling to Elena's number, his finger hesitating over the call button. He didn't know why, but a gut feeling urged him to reach out. When he pressed it, Elena's voice came through, faint and trembling. "Leonard, is that you?" He cleared his throat. "Are you okay?" Elena sobbed. "Ethan, he fell off his bike. He's in the hospital. He's asking where you are." Ethan's voice carried over the line, small but clear. "Where's Uncle Leonard?" It pierced Leonard's heart like a dagger, leaving him silent, his breathing ragged. He said, "I'm coming," and hung up. Leonard didn't hesitate. He bolted from the office, grabbing nothing but his car keys, leaping into the Bentley and racing toward the small town at breakneck speed. There was no rain this time, just faint sunlight filtering through the windshield. But his heart burned as if on fire. He reached the hospital by noon, striding into the room with none of his usual coldness. Hair disheveled, suit wrinkled, blue eyes blazing with resolve. Elena looked up from the chair by Ethan's bed, her eyes red. "You? Why are you here?" Leonard stepped forward, standing before her, his voice low but firm. "I can't live without you and Ethan." He knelt, taking her hand. "I was wrong. I thought leaving would protect you, but I can't stand being without you both. I need you, Elena. I need Ethan." Elena cried, her voice choked. "Are you sure?" "You walked away once." Leonard squeezed her hand tightly. "Surer than anything in my life. I love you, and I want to be part of this life, if you'll let me." Ethan stirred awake at the sound, his tired but brightening eyes finding Leonard. "Cool, Uncle." Leonard smiled, sitting beside the boy. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." Ethan grinned faintly, gripping his hand. "Tell me a superhero story." Elena watched, tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of hope. She nodded. "Okay, let's start over." Leonard stayed, telling Ethan a superhero tale in his clumsy but earnest way, his hand holding Elena's. He knew the past still lingered, but now he chose to face it, not to run, but to hold on to the new family he'd found. Chapter 7. A Family in the Rain. A light drizzle fell on the dirt road leading into the coastal town, tiny droplets pattering against the awning of Elena Brooks' new apartment. 2 weeks had passed since Leonard Carter had raced to the hospital in the rain, confessing his love and vowing to stay with her and Ethan forever. Now they lived in a small but cozy home, no longer haunted by the threat of eviction over unpaid rent. Thanks to Leonard quietly buying the place and letting Elena pay him back on her terms, though she still grumbled about his meddling. The house had a modest front yard where Ethan loved to romp around, and a simple living room with an old sofa that Leonard, though he'd never admit it, was starting to find more familiar than his lavish London penthouse. Leonard stood in the yard, his long black coat damp with rain, holding an old umbrella Ethan had broken the previous week while trying to fly like a superhero. He'd spent the afternoon fixing it, despite knowing nothing about umbrella repairs. A powerful CEO like him would typically delegate such tasks to an assistant. But today he wanted to do it himself, just to see the boy smile when he got his favorite item back. The rain grew heavier, but he didn't go inside, standing there with his leather shoes now caked in mud. Watching Ethan dart around him in an oversized jacket, his filthy sneakers splashing water everywhere. "Cool, uncle, be a flying superhero," Ethan cheered, throwing his arms up as if soaring, his brown eyes, mirror images of his mother's, gleaming. Leonard frowned, his deep voice tinged with rare humor. "I can't fly, Ethan, but I fixed your umbrella. Here." He held it out, the clumsy stitches glaringly obvious in the dim afternoon light. Ethan laughed loudly, rushing to hug him, his small arms wrapping tightly around Leonard's neck. "You're the best. I like you more than superheroes." Leonard froze, a bit awkward, then slowly patted the boy's shoulder, his blue eyes softening, shedding the icy edge that had once defined him. Elena stepped out from the doorway, wearing a thin gray sweater, a dry towel in hand. She paused under the awning, watching the scene with a warm smile mixed with surprise. She still wasn't used to Leonard's presence. This man who'd once walked away out of fear, the arrogant CEO she'd met in a storm, now standing here, soaked from playing with her son. She remembered his eyes in the hospital when he'd knelt and said, "I can't live without you and Ethan." She'd forgiven him, agreed to start over, but each passing day she still wondered if he'd truly stay forever. "You didn't need to be out in the yard," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with concern as the rain intensified. "It's getting heavier. Come inside." Leonard turned, his gaze locking onto hers, deep and sincere. "I want to be here with you and Ethan." I promised. He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair onto his angular face. But he didn't care. He stopped in front of her, then suddenly knelt on the wet, muddy ground, heedless of his expensive suit now smeared with dirt. Elena froze, the towel trembling in her hands. "Leonard, what are you doing?" He looked up, his blue eyes resolute. "I'm sorry, Elena. Sorry for running away before, for letting my fear hurt you and Ethan. I'm not good with loving words, but I want to be with you, with him, forever. Not because I need to make up for something, but because I love you both." His voice grew hoarse, rain streaming past his lips, but he didn't blink, as if she and Ethan were the only things he saw in this downpour. Elena stood still, tears rolling down her cheeks, mingling with the rain. She wanted to be angry, to keep her distance to protect her heart and Ethan's. But the sincerity in his voice, the way he knelt in the mud as if shedding all pride, melted her resolve. She smiled, a gentle, forgiving smile. "Okay, Leonard, we'll start over." Her voice was soft but firm, a promise answering his own. Ethan, standing nearby, suddenly dashed forward, throwing his arms around Leonard from behind. "You're staying forever? I want superhero stories every day." He laughed brightly, rain matting his hair, but his eyes shone with joy. Leonard turned, pulling the boy into his arms, holding him tight despite his soaked clothes. He smiled, a rare, warm smile, far from the cold mask he once wore. "I'm staying, and I'll tell you superhero stories, even if I'm terrible at it." Ethan cheered. "You're good. You're my superhero." Leonard stood, drawing Elena close, ignoring the rain now falling in earnest. He wrapped his arms around her and Ethan, feeling their warmth cut through his drenched, cold clothes. Under the gray sky, he leaned down, pressing a kiss to Elena's lips. Gentle yet fierce, rain trickling over their mouths, cold but carrying an oddly comforting heat. Elena kissed him back, her arms encircling him and Ethan, fear and doubt dissolving. The rain soaked through her sweater, but she didn't feel the chill, only the warmth of a new family, one she'd thought she'd never have again. They stood there, the three of them locked in an embrace beneath the rain. Leonard, once a cold CEO who knew only money and power, now held the two people he loved most, the rain washing away the scars of his past. Elena, the steadfast single mother, found a shoulder to lean on, not out of weakness, but because she chose to trust again. Ethan, the mischievous boy with a gap-toothed grin, laughed in their arms, no longer asking, "Where's Uncle?" because Uncle was here, forever. The rain didn't stop, but to them, it was no longer a symbol of pain or separation. That kiss in the rain marked a new beginning. Not perfect, with Leonard still clumsy at love, Elena still resilient in her own way, and Ethan still naughty as ever, but complete. They held hands, stepping inside, knowing that from now on, rain or shine, they'd face every storm together, no longer running away. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life